right. Hi, everyone. Welcome in. My name is Heather Meadows. I'm a premium tutor here at Applerouth. So hopefully you guys are in the right spot. This presentation, we're going to talk about SAT, ACT testing in the 2022-23 school year. Like I said, I'm going to make sure we give everyone just a couple seconds to log in so they can catch up. But let's see. Oops, sorry, y'all. All right, we just want people logged in, so we'll go ahead and get started. So those of you who just logged in, again, welcome. My name is Heather Meadows with Applerouth Tutoring. I'm a premium tutor here. I've been with Applerouth for about 5 years now. One of my favorite things, honestly, is doing these presentations because I really like demystifying this whole process for you guys. So I'm excited to do that with you guys tonight. We're going to go over a lot of different stuff. A lot of it is some detailed stuff as well. So I'm just going to ask that you guys hold your questions till the end, just because likely I'm going to answer a lot of them throughout the presentation. We'll also have a poll at the end as well, so you'll see that too. So if y'all will hang on and take that poll afterwards, it'll let us know a little bit more about you. But that being said, let's go ahead and get started. For those of you who may not know Applerouth, I'll start with a little bit of that info. Our why. When you change students' self-beliefs, you change their lives. So we really tutor the whole student. We work from the inside out, really, to help them with their confidence and their knowledge. We build skills for school and beyond, skills they can take, beyond these tests into college, into their workplace, and so on and so forth. So we offer academic tutoring, test prep, also executive functioning coaching. And so if you have any questions about any of those, definitely reach out to us here at Applerouth, and we'd love to help you guys. So speaking of, let's talk about what we're going to talk about tonight. So tonight, I'm going to start off by talking about the SAT versus the ACT. What are the differences? How to kind of figure out what's going to be better for you. We'll talk about how to prepare for testing, kind of what that will look like, what your timeline will look like based on what grade your student's in, so on and so forth. And then at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about the testing world post-pandemic. A lot of stuff has changed a little bit, but a lot of stuff is still the same too. And then I'm going to take some questions from you guys. Like I said, if you don't mind holding most of your questions till the end, just because it's very likely I'm going to answer some of the really specific ones as we go through this presentation. But all right, let's go ahead and get started. So the SAT versus the ACT, right? Structurally, these two tests are actually pretty similar. They both have a reading section. They both have a writing English section. That's kind of where you're looking at some grammar. You're correcting the grammar and the rhetoric of a piece of writing, an essay, essentially. They're both going to have math, right? SAT has a math no calculator and a math calculator section. ACT, you get to have your calculator the whole time. But again, both have math. Aside from that is where it gets a little bit different, right? So we see the ACT is going to have a science section at the end, right? Oh, it's not working. A science section at the end, which is a little bit different. We're going to talk about that. The SAT has no essay and the ACT has an optional essay. Again, we're going to talk about both of those as well. But that's kind of our basic breakdown of what we're looking here at both of these tests. Both tests are also about 3 hours total runtime. But thankfully, about 75 to 80% of the test content overlaps between these two. So don't stress too much about that stuff, which is really good. So the stuff that is in common between them are your reading skills, right? Your reading comprehension skills, reading a passage and then answering questions about them. English grammar skills, right? I talked about how they both have those sections. Graph reading and interpretation, you'll see that in both of the math sections, and you'll see it on that ACT science section I mentioned. Then both are going to deal with algebra, statistics, and some geometry in their math sections. The biggest differences come, we see these on the side, right? So the SAT has a more advanced reading section. And by that, I mean, not only are the questions slightly more complex, but the passages themselves are a little more complex for a number of reasons. We'll talk about those in a moment. The SAT also has more math word problems, which goes with the reading thing, right? There is generally more reading overall on the SAT. The ACT, on the other hand, is going to have a more advanced science. Of course, it has a science section, so there is a little bit of background knowledge you need there. And then more advanced math, right? So the math in the ACT is a little bit different than the SAT. And again, we'll talk about that as well. So the amount of time per question is also a big difference in this overall comparison of the two tests. So if you look here, this is kind of seconds per question. On the SAT, especially in this reading section, you're getting 75 seconds per question, so over a minute per question. The ACT, you're getting just under a minute. And then the math as well is really crazy. The ACT, you get a minute per question. The SAT, you're literally almost getting a minute and a half per math question. So that difference is really large. And that honestly plays a huge role in the students, kind of what ends up working out best for your student as well. The SAT's timing structure is much more forgiving. It benefits students that perhaps find themselves kind of spending more time on one question, right? They want to sit there and think about it. They like perhaps those word problems, perhaps they like the more complex reading as well. But as we'll also see, right, it's a more complicated test, even though you have more time. The ACT, on the other hand, the questions aren't as complex sometimes, but you do have to get that speed up. So this is one of the main things that can make a student prefer one test over the other. So let's talk about that math I mentioned earlier. So this is kind of a breakdown of the number of questions in each topic, right? The SAT is 62% algebra. And by algebra here, I mean it's going to consist of your typical Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 class. I know a lot of schools call them different things nowadays, but I'm just going to stick with that kind of overall idea of Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. Those are your key math classes for both of the tests, but especially the SAT. That's where a lot of those questions are going to come from. The ACT you see is a little bit different, right? Algebra is still a huge chunk of the test, but we see that geometry is much larger on the ACT, right? The SAT only has just a couple of geometry questions. They're there, but there are a lot fewer of those. And the ACT is really going to have a lot more in there. Look a little bit downwards, we see kind of the data analysis. Those are statistics, arithmetic, things like that. About the same for both tests, still, part of the test, still important to have. And then again, on the ACT, we see a little bit more trig than on the SAT. That really goes in with the geometry questions, of course. So again, that spread of math is also important too. And we see that affect a lot of students as well. If you're a student who just absolutely hated geometry, perhaps consider the SAT. Or if you really, really hate algebraic word problems, perhaps consider the ACT. Right? These are things that, especially, hopefully some of you guys have your students with you tonight. And maybe they're shaking their heads no or yes about one of these. That reading section, right? So the reading sections, these kind of, sorry, y'all. Even though the ACT forces students to go faster in that reading section, right? The ACT reading section is 40 questions in 35 minutes. So that's really under a minute per question. It's very fast. The difficulty is consistent, right? You're reading magazine article level difficulty and lengths, right, of passages. So they're really staying consistent throughout. There's none that are more difficult than the other. They're all about the same. And you kind of just keep moving at an even pace there. SAT is a little different, right? This is a really long section on the SAT. You get 65 minutes for this guy. It's almost like a marathon rather than the sprint that the ACT reading is. But the complexity comes in there, right? You may have, I don't know why these types aren't popping up, but in this center, you may have a historical passage. Sometimes we get passages written in the 1700s on the SAT. And as a result, those may take more time simply because the language is unfamiliar to you. So again, the reading is a big difference as far as content and timing as well. And again, maybe your student is nodding their head yes or no here too. And then lastly, that science section I mentioned earlier. The ACT science is kind of like, really unique. It's unlike anything you see on the SAT. The SAT does have a little bit of their science mixed into their reading and their math as well, with some graphs here and there, but no dedicated science section. And before we keep saying science too much, I want to clarify. A lot of students may have taken like a practice ACT in the past and they didn't score too well in the science section. And they feel really upset by it. They've aced AP Bio, AP Chem. They're really killing it at AP Physics. And they're, upset because, they're someone who is good at science. And I want to say right now, the science ACT section does not determine whether or not you are good at science, and it doesn't correlate either because it's not really asking you about the science. That's the secret here. The ACT science section presents you with an experiment. So they talk about experiment. We see an example on this other page where we see kind of some chemical equations. We see some graphs, some tables. They present you with an experiment and some results, and they give you questions asking you to interpret those results. So for this example on this page, cyanobacteria are mentioned. You do not need to know anything about cyanobacteria to ace this passage. This is truly about data analysis and reading graphs. So for those of you who are stressed that you've taken a science section before, don't worry too much. For those of you who are like, I hate science, I don't want to take the ACT, Maybe, really, this could actually change your mind here. It's really just interpreting graphs. It's not so crazy as it sounds. So just remember, this is a little bit different, right? All right, awesome. So let's talk about some nuts and bolts. So essentially, how do I take these tests? When do I take these tests? How do I go forward and stuff, right? So the first thing is registering. Registering is really easy on both of the tests. For the SAT, you go onto collegeboard.org. ACT is act.org. Nothing too crazy. Keep in mind, for the most part, for the official SAT and ACTs, your school cannot register you. Sometimes they do offer in-school test dates. That's a little bit different, but for the most part, you do have to do this on your own. The College Board you may be familiar with if you've taken the PSAT or AP tests as well before. Easy peasy, just go on there, you make your account, you log in. Accommodations are also really important for those of you this applies to. So if your student does need accommodations, this is something you want to think of ahead of time. So accommodations is if your student has an IEP or something at school to work with a disability. A common example is having something such as ADHD and getting extra time on the test. The biggest things to think about it ahead of time. First of all, because you want to have those accommodations on the test, right? If that's something that you truly need and it helps you do better, let's take it, right? And so the SAT, we'll start with that guy. If you want to take more than one SAT, which I recommend, and I'll talk about that in a minute, you only have to go through the process once, which is nice. Those accommodations follow you through any SAT, any AP exam, or any PSAT. And that's because, again, I mentioned a second ago, the College Board, that company, runs all those tests. So you apply once, you see if you get them or not, and then you don't have to do it again. ACT is kind of weird, little switch there. Every single ACT you want to take, you do have to send in a separate application form, essentially, which is a little bit odd, but something you want to make sure you're thinking about, right? Because you make sure, it takes a minute to do every time. It takes a little bit of time to process. So you want to make sure you do it ahead of time. And as a note, all of the accommodations would be through your school's guidance counselor or their disabilities coordinator, whichever one you have at school. So you cannot do this yourself. You have to do this through your child's school. And then again, colleges cannot see when a student has taken a test with accommodations. That's the law. So do not worry about discrimination or anything like that. Again, if you have accommodations, use them, right? You want to do the best you can on these tests. Super scoring. Super scoring is another important thing to think about, right? And I mentioned a second ago that I want you to take multiple tests. And here's why. So let's say, for example, you take a test in March. You take an SAT in March. Your verbal and your math are both pretty good. The math you do really well on, though. You're really proud of that 670 in the math. Okay. Well, let's say in May you take some more and they both go down, and maybe you weren't feeling well that day, or you just found like there was a lot of geometry on the math and you hadn't reviewed it or something. No big deal. So you really work on it. You really feel like you wanted to get your verbal up a lot. So you study that a lot before the June test. So when you take the June test, you bump it all the way up to a 660, which is awesome. But your math goes down, or doesn't really go back up to what it originally was, which stinks. You were really hoping to get a higher math too. Well, the good thing about super scoring is that it creates this best of score. You can take your highest math score and your highest verbal score and combine those guys into a total highest score. So you get this 1330 down here. So super scoring, again, takes your best of score from each section and combines them. And this is why you want to take multiple dates, right? We see this student took 3 dates and they were able to get that really great super score there. And this is also true for the ACT, same idea here. This just happens to be an SAT example. So taking more than one test is really important. And this is really the #1 reason why. What's nice is the vast majority of schools super score the SAT. I'm going to say like 90%. And many do the ACT. I would say like 85%. The only reason I make a slight distinction there is for some reason, some schools may not super score the ACT. Some kind of various ones, some small schools, some larger schools as well. So for example, a couple of years ago, Auburn University in Alabama would not super score the ACT, but would do the SAT. They do both now, but that was something to think about. These are really easy to find though. Whatever schools you're thinking of, just a quick little Google search, does blah, 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 super score this. Easy to find. There's lots of really good tables online too. Definitely something just to double check though before you start working on it, because your approach would be different if your school does not do that. So prep, right? Okay, now I need to take multiple tests. How do I do that? Well, Set realistic goals. You want to find score ranges online. My recommendation is to use the College Board website or Applerouth website. You can see how your scores compare to other applicants at your school. This allows you to add schools you're interested in, and it kind of compares them, which is really helpful. And so what you guys can do, and this is the most helpful thing you can really do, is look up this phrase, freshman profile of whatever school you want, right? So let's say, for example, you're interested in going to the University of Georgia. So you would Google University of Georgia freshman profile. And what that's going to do is that's going to pull up a page for you. Schools love to brag about their students. So it's going to pull up a page of the most recent stats of the most recently admitted class at the University of Georgia. That's what you want to find. That's the numbers you want. But you can't just take those blindly, right? You can't see like, oh, they let in a kid with a 2.7 GPA. Cool, I can do that. Not quite. What you want to look at, and it's called the middle 50th percentile. That's your goal phrase you're looking at. And we're looking at this for the test scores, right? The middle 50th percentile is the middle section of students that were taken, right? That were taken in by the school. That's going to be the spot where you're competitive, right? You have a good chance of getting in. We're not going to really worry about the top 25, right? Those are kids who maybe decided this was their safety school or something, right? Or we're not going to worry about the bottom 25 either. Those are probably athletes or, people who gave a lot of money. So we're not going to stress about those either. We're looking at that middle 50th percentile. Again, freshman profile, middle 50th percentile. That's what you're truly looking at. And you want to look at these for test scores. GPA is not as reliable here just because GPAs vary across the country about how they're calculated and stuff. But this is really what you want to look for. Whatever schools you're thinking about, go ahead and find all of these numbers and write them down. Keep them in a Google Doc or something, right? That's really going to help you guys as you go through this process of applying for colleges, is to keep all the information in a centralized place. Now that you've got those numbers, okay, I'm going to take multiple test dates, right? Because I know I need to get a certain number. We talked about this earlier, super scoring potential, right? You gain confidence over time too, right? That first time you go is stressful. So you want to be able to know in the back of your head that, I'm going to take it 2 more times after this. I'm going to do as well as I can today. I'm going to accept that if it's too stressful, it's too stressful. It also negates any test difficulty or scoring fluctuation. Like I mentioned earlier, maybe you show up and you forgot to review geometry and there's like a lot of geometry going on. You know what? It's okay. It happens. Try again next time. Or scoring fluctuation too. That's a real thing. They grade the test differently every time. So that is something that can affect you. And it allows you to set incremental goals, right? So if you're trying to get your score up 120 points, you're not trying to do that in one go, right? You're like, okay, if I can get up 100 points this time, then maybe the next time I focus on my math or something. It allows you to do that. Our recommendation is to plan for 3 and then stop once you reach your goal. Technically, you are allowed to take each test as many times as you want. But I, in my years at Applerouth, would never recommend taking more than 4 or so. And really only that 4th one is if you need 10 more points or 1 more point or something, right? 3 is really a great number to get, your optimal performance there. When do you take these tests? Lucky for you guys, they are offered a number of times throughout the year. So there's months where it's only an SAT, months where it's only the ACT, and months where you can take both of them actually. So this is this is a good thing to screenshot right here. So what's happening here is that these are kind of set up really well, right? And the thing is, you want to think about what your student has going on, right? Maybe they're in a fall sport or a spring sport or something. You want to avoid those seasons. Maybe they go to summer camp every summer. They're going to be gone all summer. Maybe they're taking a really hard class in the spring, so on and so forth. So let's say, for example, maybe your student does take a fall sport, right? Maybe your student plays a fall sport. So we're really not thinking about doing any of these guys. Whoops. We're like, nah, I don't really want to do any of these guys. Maybe they want to take the SAT. Boom, March, May, June SATs. That's a great kind of 3 SATs in a row. If you start in March, you can prep maybe starting in January. You're done with your fall sport. You're good to go there. And you can do March, May, June, done. And, there's lots of different opportunities here, right? The December, February, April is a popular ACT setup, as well as the April, June, July ACT. These 3 SATs are also popular to do together, these 3 ACTs, so on and so forth, right? Really, the thing is to plan this out ahead of time, though. Make sure you're in town that weekend. Make sure you're prepping before time as well, right? And you're not being like, oh my gosh, I have to take a test this weekend. What am I going to do about that, right? Thinking about it ahead of time is going to take so much stress away, not only from your student, but also from you, right? Making sure they get to where they need to be on every test taking where they are. So again, make sure you're planning this out ahead of time. It's good to start thinking about this before it's time for your student to start taking tests. And you should take a mock test too. That's really the true first step here, is taking a practice test. So practice tests, whether through Applerouth or somewhere else, can tell you what you would get, on a real test. It gives you a starting point, right? Otherwise, you're kind of looking at this blind, right? They mimic the real thing. It can tell you something about time management, right? Maybe you run out of time on this section. So either you should consider perhaps the SAT instead, or perhaps you just need to work on your timing some. Also, wrong answer patterns, right? Shaky content. Maybe you did not remember a lot of stats and you definitely need to go work on some stats, right? By knowing this ahead of time, by taking a practice test, right? You not only don't, spend an official test date and all that energy on that, just finding a baseline score. You get a baseline score at home and you can work on it from there, right? You can see which questions you got incorrect and what you did. Maybe you just made a calculation error, right? Those are great things to find out ahead of time. So really, taking a practice test is the first step with anything in this whole process. So that was right, testing, right? We talked about the SAT, the ACT, the differences, how to go about starting the prep and everything from there. Here's a little bit of a different thing we've added, obviously, recently, testing post-pandemic. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the different things you may have been hearing from colleges, what some leaders in the area I think are going to happen in the future. So this all is up to change, right? Just keep that in mind. Some of this next information is very new and could change as we go throughout the rest of the year. The first thing is that the New World Order is largely test optional. A lot of schools in the country now are test optional, but that does not mean they are test blind, right? It doesn't mean they don't look at your test scores if you send them, and it doesn't mean a test score couldn't help you at the end of the day. And it doesn't mean there aren't some schools who still require it. So a strong test score can still strengthen your application, can affect your admissions decision. So things that are also entirely optional, and they technically have been entirely optional this whole time, right? Taking rigorous classes, submitting good AP scores, demonstrating interest, having leadership positions, right? We've been doing that this whole time too, haven't we? Just keep this in mind, right? Even though this test optional is very common, it does not mean these are gone. They are still here, and they are still they're still playing a huge role in the testing, the college admissions world. What does test optional actually mean? It means they will consider an application complete and review it, even if they haven't gotten your scores. And it says, some colleges will look at some with or without, and it means you can send them. And if you send them, they will think about your scores and part of their decision. More of them are embracing it long-term, not just, temporarily during the pandemic. Of course, I think pretty much across the board, all schools did it temporarily during the pandemic because we simply were unable to test. A lot of schools are considering doing it forever, though. Again, doesn't mean they're test blind. That's kind of a different thing. Some interesting things, right? So Harvard actually has done test optional. What they're planning to do is to do it for an application cycle from 23 to 26. And they're doing that to get some data on how it affects their overall collegiate 4-year undergraduate performance. So this is something that is going to be changing over time, right? They are truly doing active research as we are talking right now on this. That's kind of why we're in a weird spot right now. And there's a lot more applications as a reason, though, right? If you don't have to take the tests, that makes it a lot easier, right? Because, taking the SAT, of course, costs money and takes time. And sending the scores also costs money and takes time. So this allows a lot more students to more easily apply to schools with a little bit less work, a little bit less time and money. So you simply see applications going up as well, right? Here are some examples of some schools. NYU, UCLA, Duke, huge, really well-known schools going up a lot. Small schools like Colgate too going up a crazy amount. Can you imagine the perhaps 4 or 5 person admission team at Colgate dealing with all of this, right? So this is a lot to handle right now. Colleges are going through some changes trying to handle this. Selective schools became even more selective. Whoops. So if we look at this, these are admission rates, right? So for example, in 2019, NYU accepted 16% of their applicants, and now they just accept 12%. Again, that's the number of application goes up. That's a lot, right? That changes it. Look at some schools like Auburn or Northeastern, right? Auburn used to be 81%. That's pretty good. You feel pretty safe about your application, and now it's 49%, right? That's maybe starting to get a little bit competitive, a little bit different, right? Northeastern, especially from 20 down to 6. So this is, again, changing the landscape a lot for a lot of these schools. Ivy admission rates also plummeted, right? So even those, right, I told you Harvard did that. They only accepted 4.6 in the first place, and now they're only accepting 3.2. I know it's a 1% difference, but that's a lot, especially if you're looking at Harvard rates in the first place. And same for a lot of these other schools, right? So really, really affecting that overall. So with more applicants, right, because it's easier to apply, fewer test scores, less certainty regarding yield, right? How are these kids going to do? More admissions offices turn deeper to early decision. Early decision is where you apply to one school, you say, okay, I promise if I get in, I'll come here. And they say, okay. They're going to take you more likely because they know you're going to come there. You're a guaranteed admit, right? And since they have so many to look through, this is kind of an easier way for them to do all that, right? Logistically, honestly. And if you look at this is how much of the class was filled by early decision. Look at something like University of Virginia. University of Virginia, 30% of their freshman class already taken up by early decision kids. So if you're applying as a regular decision, there's only 70% left of the class space to be in, right? So this is just really changing, right? Early decision is playing a much, much larger role today. But why do test scores still matter? They are still a hedge against grade inflation, right? So across the board, I mentioned earlier, GPAs don't really mean a lot of the same thing they do anymore, right? Having all A's is just so much more common. Schools are inflating grades, the way they grade things have changed. If you take an AP class, sometimes you get extra points, all that stuff. It's hard for schools to truly compare GPAs at the end of the day. Something neutral, something that's, from a third party like these tests can be more easily compared. Test scores are a strong predictor of graduation. They really are, and the research has been done for a long time. They're a helpful way to compare a broad, diverse group. Again, different schools, right? Just because your school didn't offer a lot of APs doesn't mean you wouldn't still be a great student as someone whose school did. And your SAT or ACT scores can help support that argument. And they all may differentiate students who might look similar, right? Maybe you have a really similar student, but you managed to get a much better score on a test, or even just your section scores in one section are better. Maybe you're applying to the engineering school and you aced the math section or something. Something to think about, right? Think about your argument for yourself, essentially. And testing is still required by public colleges in some states. For example, I don't know if you can tell where I'm from, Georgia. Georgia, almost all the public schools are test optional, except for University of Georgia and Georgia Tech. Florida has a lot of that, and Tennessee as well. And we expect that in the Carolinas and Texas as well. It is still required by some schools simply because of the number of applications they get. Again, it's a logistical situation. And a relatively small but significant number of colleges will not use them at all, right? I kept saying test blind earlier, right? Oops, I'm sorry. Test blind, I'll write that up here because it's not up here. Test blind, a test blind school is a school that will not look at your test no matter what. They want to only look at everything else the students offer. This is really only about like 3% of schools in the US, but still something to think about, right? Make sure you're looking and seeing if this phrase is something you see with the school you're looking at. Very different than test optional, right? Just keep that in mind that as a phrase you may see every once in a while. Another reason to think about having them merit aid. A lot of schools actually consider test scores and part of your scholarships and your merit aid as well. So here's an example at the University of Alabama. University of Alabama is one of these schools that does this. To get some of these scholarships, you need to send in a score, right? For example, this really, really great presidential scholarship, your annual award of $28,000, looks like your in-state tuition is only $10,000 anyway. And if your out-of-state tuition, this would almost cover all of it. That could be worth it, right? To really bump up that score. And this is true for some other, states. Again, for example, Georgia has a statewide scholarship program called the Hope Scholarship. To get that, you do have to submit a very specific test score. You have to get higher than a something on both tests to get that money. This is part of it too. So again, don't brush off testing as soon as you hear test optional. This could still be important for you and your student. This is a lot of money to save in the long run. And again, there are a number of other schools like this. This is just one example. So when do I do it? When should I do it, right? Are they going to add value to your application, right? Is this something you want to see? Is this something that you're like, this goes along with this, right? I have a great GPA and I did well on my test as well. Or, I am really a math person and I'm applying to the engineering school. I know my reading score wasn't excellent, but man, I aced that math section. This is a great argument for you. again, like I was just saying, STEM and business, it may matter more, right? You know, it seems that the admissions rate were similar between those with and without test scores, except in STEM and business, right? This is a quote from a leader in the testing world, right? Something to think about there. Again, what's your specific argument? Why do this school want me to come there and study something? May better my major, right? Like I said a second ago. You know, fine arts or music majors, right? It's okay. You know, very likely that your test scores being average or slightly below average aren't going to hurt you a lot, especially if you're submitting auditions or something else like that as well, right? Something to think about there too. Again, it could just help you in general if it's about what you're looking for there. Also depends on your GPA, right? If you have average scores, but you are just an excellent student all around, you've killed your AP tests and stuff, but something about standardized testing gets you. Average scores may weaken your profile slightly, right? Students with test scores well below their grades may not want to send it if it doesn't tell a story that makes sense. Students with better test scores in their grades, not insanely better, right? Don't want anyone to be suspicious, but you know, maybe they get okay grades, maybe they went through some sort of personal problems, personal experiences during a year and their grades suffered, but they came back and they really killed those tests. Maybe that's something else to think about too, right? Again, what's your whole story as a student, as an applicant? What do you want to tell? And how can the test scores help you with that? How can you use those? And section scores matter, right? I mentioned earlier, right? Like, let's say you are applying to an engineering program. You know, not all 1400s are created equal, right? This is a really good example. You could have an even 700, 700. Okay, good. That's great. Excellent score. Maybe you did get a 600 verbal, which is still good, but you got literally a perfect math score. That's an amazing argument for yourself, right? That is so, so worth it. On the other hand, maybe you are still applying to the engineering program, but this is your setup. That's a little concerning, right? Why is your math so much lower than your verbal? It's a really, really excellent verbal, but you would want it to be a little more even. This could be a case where either you don't send them in or you work on improving that math some more to get it maybe to a 700 or so at least. Okay, here's a good question. I'm gonna actually stop and answer this question just because it's relevant to this, right? How do you tell if your test scores are better or worse than your GPA? What I would do there is I would definitely, again, looking at that freshman profile, right? So if you go to that freshman profile for that school you're looking at, you'll see a middle 50th% test scores and a middle 50% GPA. You can consider those to kind of go with each other, right? So essentially, if your GPA is lower than that middle 50th%, but your test score is higher, then you know that there's a mismatch there. Definitely use that for each school. That's a good question, though. Yeah, definitely a good question. I believe there is a recording sent out as well. So, yep, exactly. Thank you. You cannot unsee a weak score, right? Make sure you really want to send it. A low test score, it can call into question those things, right? Don't send those if you have the option, right? I'm not saying like don't send all your super scores and stuff like that, but if you're just not sure if your score is going to do something, maybe don't send it, right? Maybe not go test optional for a school. Again, truly consider, is it a good argument for me as a student, as an applicant to come to this school? What about the SAT? So we're almost there, I promise. There's a lot of changes coming up this year, and I wanted to make sure we talked about them briefly because the SAT has a lot of odd changes coming around. So they ended their subject test in 2021. They also ended their essay in 2021. The ACT is the only one that offers an essay anymore. And they're going to be digital testing in the future. So digital testing is a lot different than the current paper test as far as like structure and things like that. And we know a little bit, but not a lot about it right now. So that's something to definitely keep an eye on. The biggest thing to consider is students who are currently sophomores. Students who are currently sophomores are going to be the ones affected by this, and anyone younger. Students who are currently sophomores actually have an interesting situation where they may be able to take either the paper or the digital, depending on when you take it, right? So it's kind of something to keep in mind. If your student is younger than a sophomore, they likely are going to take an all digital test. So a lot of this stuff is still the same as far as the actual test itself, the content, the strategy. That's what's going to change a lot there. So how is it different? Tests will be shorter. You get more times to answer questions, right? Less emphasis on speed. Your reading passages will be shorter, but cover a wider range of topics. You'll be able to have a calculator the whole time, but the scores will still, stay the same. You can have 800 each section, essentially. Aside from that, again, lots of other different things happening there. Definitely a lot more information you can find out online. Nothing that we don't need to go into too terrible detail tonight, just because there may be some juniors here and some sophomores who can still do the paper test. But something to be on the lookout for and to think about as you go forward. This is something that is going to change. But Applerouth is ready, thankfully. For over 20 years, we've been changing with every single change the test has done. We do offer fixed form digital SATs and ATTs of our own. As we learn more about it, we will release updated prep materials and digital adaptive testing for our students. So definitely, since you guys are already signed up for this webinar, that is great. I have no doubt we will in the future have great free webinars to talk about the test as we know more about it. So you guys are already in the right place thinking about the future as these testings. And lastly, just a little bit of a plug here before I take some questions from you guys. So some upcoming test dates that you still have time to prep for. There's a December 3rd SAT and December 10th ACT. Lots of different ways to prep. You can do an online self-paced course, which is $199. You can do small groups, online and in person if you are in one of our in-person markets, which is Atlanta, New York City, DC, Seattle. We also offer private tutoring as well. So feel free to call us, or you can schedule time to talk. People that work at the office are really great in talking you through what your students having going on, and kind of helping you figuring out what your path is really. So now I'm going to take some questions from you guys. So I honestly really like this part the most. I love taking questions. So I'm going to go ahead and pop in there. Let's see. Digital starts January 2023. It's actually kind of, yes, let me go back to that slide. Yeah. Because that's a good question. Oops. Yes, digital testing in 2023 and 2024. I believe it's fall 2023. I might be incorrect there. So the idea is kind of that, like, if you are a class of 2025, essentially, right? You'd be a sophomore now, right? Yes, okay, just checking. You'd be a sophomore now. And so essentially, if you're a class of 2025, you're likely going to take tests in 2024 or so, probably, right? 2024, 2023 or so. I believe it's fall 2023 when the testing's starting. So the thing is that, right, fall of 2023, you could take a digital test, same for spring of 2024 and beyond. But also, if you're a sophomore right now, you could take a paper test in spring of 2023, right? If you are a sophomore who's already in an advanced math class and you want to go ahead and take the test, you can get it over with and take a paper test in 2023 spring and kind of do that. So something that's interesting, class of 2025 has an interesting setup right now where they kind of pick and choose. Beyond that, class of 2026, likely it's going to be digital, right? 2026 and beyond, you're looking at the digital test. Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you for asking that so I could clarify myself here. Oops. All right, since the SAT testing pattern changes in 2024, how different is it going to be from the current testing pattern and questions? That's something that we don't know a lot about. We know a little bit, right? We know, again, it's less, you have more time on each section. It's going to be a little bit shorter. Some of the other stuff, though, is something that we will learn over time as far as how the test itself is going to change. As far as the content goes, it should be the same, right? Right, the content should still be the same. You'll need to know your algebra. You'll need to be able to read passages and answer questions about them. You'll need to be able to think about English grammar and things like that. The same core skills that your student should have anyway. Just a different way to have the test. Simply that's it. Yeah. Okay, my advice for future online test takers. And so I want to remind you guys too, this is only the SAT. If you are taking the ACT, no plans to go digital at the moment for the ACT. So just keep that in mind. This is only if you happen to be thinking about the SAT. This is something that makes you nervous. The ACT is always there as an option, right? They may go digital eventually, but we haven't really heard a lot from them at the moment. So my advice for future online test takers is keep doing well, right? Again, keep taking practice tests and things like that. And just keep an ear out, right? I'm sure, again, since you guys already get the Applerouth emails, keep an ear out, sign up for a webinar specifically talking about the digital tests and such, right? Kind of think about that from there. And again, consider, do you want to take an ACT instead, right? Yeah. All right, let's see. Thoughts about a May, June, August progression for the SAT? Yeah, that works great. A May, June, August. Exactly, yeah. or an August, October, November cycle. Both totally fine. Yeah. I'm actually going to go back to that page. I think that's what someone's requesting as well. Let me go back to that slide really quick. I really love that slide too. And so the biggest thing about deciding when to take a test, again, think about what your students' extracurriculars are. The biggest thing is Algebra 2. Algebra 2. Have you taken Algebra 2 yet? So that's my biggest recommendation. Your goal, complete Algebra 2, or have it almost completed, right? Essentially, like, let's say, for example, you are, what was it you were asking? May, June, August, right? That works out where, let's say, like, you are taking Algebra 2 this year. So starting at, you know, May, June, that's okay, right? You're almost at the end of your Algebra 2 class. Totally fine. Exactly. You've got 99% of the knowledge down. Yeah. Or you can wait till the fall, right? It just depends again. If you're a senior though, I would definitely do more of the spring situation. Take it spring of your junior year rather than fall of your senior year, right? That's going to be way less stressful. Fall of your senior year, you're not only enjoying your senior year, you are also actually writing those applications, which is a lot of work in itself. So you want to make sure those test scores are not something we're stressing about at the same time. Good question. Thank you. All right. Okay, as I mentioned, we're prepared for all the changes. How often do the tutors take the test? Will they be taking the digital SAT? Yes, we have a team of tutors that take the test. They actually only let adults take it a couple times a year. Like, just so they take it whenever it's offered a couple times a year, I believe. But yeah, so we're prepared. Will they be taking the digital SAT? I don't know that question yet. The question is, will the SAT allow like adults, non-high school students to take it? So that one's kind of up in the air, right? We're still learning a lot as the rest of it goes. Do you prep for each SAT test and what's the cost? So the cost would depend on what your student decides to do, where you are, if you want to do self-prep, a class, anything like that. We do prep for each SAT test in that we have group classes that like lead up to each test. So like you can, if let's say example, you want to do the March SAT, we likely have a group class designed to lead up right until that one. And for the rest of tests during the year. If you work with a private tutor, like a one-on-one person, that would then more, you would work with them to figure out a schedule for you. Is there a difference in how schools value the importance of the SAT versus the ACT? No, all schools see them exactly equally. Good question, right? No bias one way or the other as far as that goes. So truly you want to go with whatever is best for your student. Thank you. International Digital starts in March 23. There we go. Perfect. Thank you for clarifying that. Is your in-person tutoring more expensive than online? And if so, why? I'm actually not 100% sure. I'm so sorry. I'm on the tutoring side doing the presentations and stuff. I believe it does also depend on where you are, maybe. I'm not 100% sure. I definitely would give us a call at the office. Maybe able to tell you a lot more about all of that stuff. Yeah, good. Awesome. All right. So are there any other questions? Like I said, I love questions. This is my favorite part. I'm going to go back to the end here. All right. Let's see, any other questions? Feel free to send them in. Okay, so for math, the recommendation is to have completed Algebra 2, reading and writing, what level? That one is not really anything you can nail down, unfortunately, because schools are going to offer all kinds of different stuff and students are different readers right at home. The thing I can recommend for that is less about taking a specific class and more about encouraging your student to read on their own at home. Reading, the more you read, the faster you get at it, the better you get at it. You also become a better speller. You become a better writer yourself. So just encouraging your student to read things for pleasure at home is the best thing you can do to really prepare them for the reading and writing sections. Yeah, so yeah, we will be sending we will be sending a recording out. Don't stress if you join late. Yeah, good. What kind of reading would I recommend? I just recommend whatever you like, right? The best thing, your student wants, the more they like to read something, the more they're going to read at the end of the day, right? So, whatever your student's interested in, whether it's novels or graphic novels, or they like nonfiction, or they like fantasy or whatever's good for them. Definitely, the goal there is to create a lifelong reader at the end of the day. Someone who is a lifelong reader is going to be better at those sections naturally. Good question. It's fun. All right. Okay, so we're also going to send out a poll. It's going to talk a little bit more about getting to know you guys. They should be sending it out in just a second. So if you guys don't mind completing that, that would really help us out. Yeah, there it is in polls and quizzes. It should have popped up. Yeah, that would help us out a little bit, get some more information on how we're doing here and such. Again, keep adding Q&As as well, or Q's, questions, if you have any. Happy to help. The biggest thing for a lot of you guys, though, is just taking a practice test, right? Well, first considering, when's the best time for your student to start thinking about this, right? Is your student only a freshman and we're not stressing about it? Are they a sophomore, but they're in an advanced math class? Could be, you could have the time to take that now. Are they a junior? Juniors are great time to take it. Pretty much anytime junior year, unless you're in Algebra 2, that would wait slightly towards the spring of your junior year. But yeah, kind of think about that. And then again, that first step is to take a mock or a practice test of both tests, an SAT and an ACT. Then from there, you can pick a test and go that way. The thing is, you want to pick a test initially. You pick the SAT or you pick the ACT, and then you head that way the whole time, right? You prep towards those tests, you find your schedule, you get your prep, you look at your goal scores, and you go from there. The biggest thing is to not save things for the last minute, right? Give yourself these schedules and these calendars ahead of time. As far as practice tests go, how you can do that, you have a lot of options. So of course, here at Applerouth, we offer practice tests. I believe we offer free ones online. I believe you can also pay a fee to get one mailed to you. I think we still do that. And again, if you're in one of our markets, we do offer in-person tests from time to time. You'll have to look at our calendar on our website to see more about that. But we do offer those. So a great way to start. Your school may offer them or things like that as well. But kind of just get those scores and start from the get-go, right? And see how your student feels about them. And again, maybe your student takes the SAT or the ACT and is really hates one of those, and that's okay to say no to that one and then move on from there. And again, maybe your student gets about equal on both of the tests. Then it's just a preference thing from there, right? Or it could be even a, do we want to even deal with the digital SAT or not question. Hopefully you guys have gotten that poll and filled it out for us. I don't have any more questions, so definitely send me any more questions if you guys have any. Nope. Okay, well, if there's no more questions, then I will let y'all go to enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you again so much for joining us tonight. I hope I was able to answer some of your overall questions about the testing and how this works for the future. So hopefully if you guys have any other questions or you are looking into prep or taking practice tests, definitely reach out to us at Applerouth. Our phone number is in the bottom of the screen there, as well as an email. And then of course our website is just applerouth.com. Lots of stuff there. You can sign up for classes, for tests, for more webinars, anything like that. But if you guys have any more questions, you are free to go. I believe a recording will be sent to you as well. And again, thanks for joining us. I'll hang around for a couple minutes in case there are any more questions though. Someone asked me what's the origin of the company's name, Applerouth. I like that. That's very fun. So our founder, his last name is Applerouth. So Jed Applerouth founded the company in 2001. That's a fun question. No, I like that. And it worked out well with the Apple, right? Oops, another question. Oh yeah. Yep, yeah. I always think that's a fun one. All right. Well, it seems like you guys don't have any more questions. So once again, I'll let you go and thanks for joining us again. So I hope you'll have a great evening.